Welcome back to Against the Grain, the Farm Aid podcast. This is episode 1 in our 7-part series on musical artists and activism. I'm Jessica Elise Kern.
And I'm Michael Stewart Foley. As you may know, this is Farm Aid's 40th anniversary year, and we're planning a huge celebration at our festival in Minneapolis in September. It's going to be at the University of Minnesota football stadium. Check out all the details like this year's lineup and about the venue at farmaid.org/podcast. The festival is Farm Aid's signature annual event where we raise awareness and the money that keeps the organization going all year. Funding farm organizations, supporting the family farm movement through advocacy and public education, and staffing the only national hotline for farmers.
And that work would not be possible without the extraordinary generosity of artists who donate their time and talent each year, paying their band and crew and all the travel expenses. This year, like every year, the festival will feature something like 11 hours of music performed by artists committed to Farm Aid's mission of keeping family farmers on the land. They come to stand together with and celebrate family farmers. If you know a bit about Farm Aid's history, which we discussed way back in the first episode of Against the Grain, then you know that Farm Aid was founded in an era known for benefit concerts. Going back to the Concert for Bangladesh and the No Nukes concerts of the 1970s, and most famously Live Aid, a huge concert on 2 continents for Ethiopian famine relief.
There's also all of the charity singles put out on record, like We Are the World. Musicians mobilizing to do good, to support various humanitarian causes, seemed pretty normal, almost routine in 1985. But long before benefit concerts became a part of our culture, musical artists had been taking up social and political causes for decades, even before the advent of recorded sound. Some of the earliest American songs for a cause, songs we still know, may have been those sung by enslaved people in the 19th century. Songs like Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, or Michael Rowed the Boat Ashore were songs of faith, but also songs of leaving behind oppression and finding freedom in the Promised Land.
Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's a-gonna trouble the water. See that band of...
In this song, Wade in the Water, there are references to baptism and redemption, but many scholars believe that it was also meant as a reminder to fugitive slaves to walk in and cross streams and rivers as a way of throwing dogs off their scent. It's so interesting that these songs originated with a social or political purpose, and most people don't even know about that.
Yeah, and it turns out that popular music has always been a vehicle for activism. Remember World War I?
No.
Yeah, me neither. But in 1915, before the United States even entered the war, Alfred Bryan's I Didn't Raise My Boy to Be a Soldier sold 650,000 copies of its sheet music to be played at home. This is 2 years before George M. Cohan's pro-war song, Over There, became a hit.
I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier. I brought him up to be my pride and joy. Who dared to play some musket on his door.
Songs like these were played on early Victrola record players or on a piano. The kind of music and activism we think of today in America really started with folk singers, the traveling troubadours who would show up to sing in support of striking workers at picket lines and in labor camps.
I think that political activism in American music starts with the folk scene. And if you go back to the wobbly singer Joe Hill, who was an influence on Woody Guthrie in the 1930s and 40s, who was then an influence on Pete Seeger and a kind of mentor to Pete Seeger.
That's Dorian Lynskey, the music journalist and author of 33 Revolutions Per Minute, a history of protest songs from Billie Holiday to Green Day. We caught up with him from his home in London.
And then through the 50s and this kind of winter of McCarthyism, you've got these really important figures, Seeger and his circle, keeping the spirit of the left alive within the folk scene, places like Highlander Folk School, which Martin Luther King visited and found very inspiring. Obviously, Seeger was partly responsible for writing We Shall Overcome, which became the anthem of the civil rights movement. So you had songwriting and activism tied in together.
As Dorian explained, thanks to this trend of activist songwriting and showing up to support the labor movement and the civil rights movement, the folk music of the 1960s, think Bob Dylan or Joan Baez, goes on to inform more popular music later in the decade. Farm-aid board artist Neil Young and other artists like Joni Mitchell started out in folk, but as Dorian points out, carried their political consciousness into rock and folk rock.
It's not a hugely important part of early 1950s rock and roll, but it becomes via folk massive during the 60s. And then that has a knock-on effect. Bob Dylan inspires Sam Cooke to write A Change Is Gonna Come. Protest becomes more of an aspect of soul music. And I would say, by the time you get to the 1970s, soul music and black music in general is far more consistently politically outspoken than rock is.
Which is great, because coming up after the break, we'll talk to a bunch of folk musicians about their work. Stay with us. For 40 years, Farm Aid has stood with family farmers against corporate power, bad policies, and climate disasters. As Farm Aid founder and president Willie Nelson says, family farmers aren't backing down, and neither are we. Head to our website to learn more, farmaid.org/podcast.
Welcome back. For the past 2 years, we've headed to the Luck Reunion Festival on Farm Aid founder Willie Nelson's ranch in the Texas Hill Country just outside of Austin. This festival brings together musicians, chefs, and artisans who are contributing to American roots culture.
Between the dust and the heat, which kind of feels like a hot hairdryer blowing on you all day, we caught up with many artists. Some who have played at Farm Aid and others who haven't. One of the memorable interviews we've had was with Steve Earle, who has played a few Farm Aid concerts over the years. With recording gear in hand, we trekked through crowds and around the grounds of the festival to find Steve, holed up in a vintage camping trailer with much-needed air conditioning. He welcomed us in, and we crammed around a small round table to chat about music and politics, and why he got into this realm as an artist.
I'm Steve Earle. I'm a singer and a songwriter and some other stuff. I don't try to make any judgments about people one way or the other about whether they do it or not. I think it is a personal choice. For me, it's not that big of a deal. It's not that big of a choice. I basically came out of coffee houses, so I'm essentially a folk singer. So there was always my first shows in front of people were happening in 1969 and 70 and 71, and the first things I did that wasn't a talent show at school. And, things were pretty political. Vietnam War was going on, and I was draft bait. And, that's why we were so much more politically active during that war, is the draft.
Yeah, wars are a tricky thing. The people that start wars are usually, it's easy for them to do because they're not going, and their kids aren't going. And it's, whichever side of this whole debate that we're having about the war you're on right now, I think it's really important to remember that, George W. Bush's kids are not going to go. Dick Cheney's kids are not going to go. John Kerry's kids are not going to go. Your kids are going to go. My boys are 17 and 22, and I think we need to have this discussion. This is... Jimmy joined the army 'cause he had no place to go. 'Cause there ain't nobody hiring around here since all the jobs went down to Mexico. Reckon that learn himself a trade.
That was Steve Earle playing Rich Man's War at Farm Aid 2004 outside of Seattle, Washington, 2 years into the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and 2 months before the presidential election. And don't miss Steve playing this year at Farm Aid 40 on September 20th in Minneapolis. One of the things I appreciate about folk singers like Steve Earle is the way they tell stories as a way to bring the listener to the issue. And sometimes, often, it comes from personal experience.
My focus has been against the death penalty. That's a tough one. That was an unpopular issue that I chose for myself, but I chose it because I'm from Texas. And, it's just one of those things that they were killing a lot of people. And my mother lived, in Humble, north of Houston, really close enough to Huntsville that she felt like she could feel it when they started executing people. And so I got connected and I wrote a song called Billy Austin, and people started calling me because of that. I guess because I'd been locked up for a very short period of time, inmates started writing me, and some of them were death row inmates. And so that's connected me more and more to the issue. I finally ended up witnessing an execution in Texas, which I don't recommend. But the guy asked me, and I didn't know how you say no to that. It was a dying man's last request. And my guys were all guilty. Innocent guys didn't call me for some reason. And I'm opposed to the death penalty. My objection to the death penalty is not about what it does to anybody on death row. It's about keeping me from going to hell. It's like, if this is a democracy, which that becomes more questionable every day, but if it is a democracy, then if the government executes someone, then I'm like, that's me. That's being done in my name, and I object to the damage that does to my spirit.
That was Steve Earle talking about his song, Billy Austin. Steve also wrote a song called Over Yonder, Jonathan's Song, about Jonathan Nobles, the inmate he knew personally and whose execution he talks about witnessing. That song is really worth a listen.
Yeah, that was pretty heavy. Later that same day, we caught up with some younger artists who write and perform in the same folk tradition as Steve Earle, but who weren't even born when Steve Earle played his first few Farm Aid shows.
Rainbow Girls are a group of 3 women from Northern California, Vanessa May, Caitlin Gowdy, and Erin Chapin, who have been getting a lot of attention, not only in the U.S., but also abroad.
We're folk musicians at the end of the day, and for anyone to think that a folk musician wouldn't speak their mind or speak truth to power and make sure that we advocate for women, that we advocate for people that are not white, cis, heterosexual men, they're sorely mistaken. And if they see a way out the door, that's totally okay. Don't let it hit you on the way out.
That was Vanessa.
Or stick around and maybe change your mind. I gotta say, it's a little more fun to not just be boring.
That was Erin.
And it's a lot easier to be afraid of someone or something that you have this thing built up in your mind of who they are and what they stand for. And if you're actually in the same room with someone, it's a lot harder to hate them if you have any kind of real conversation at all with another person.
And that was Caitlin. And as we talked, it became clear that not only do Rainbow Girls sing songs that are overtly political, but they view their very existence as a band as a political act.
I remember reading a quote by Joan Baez once. She said, this is not exact quote, but she said she felt she was more of she was an activist first and a musician second. And I was like, yeah, isn't that the whole reason we're doing this? It's because when I grew up, I didn't have any female idols who played music, who were musicians, who were in a band with other females. There'd be a front person or an awesome, there's been female musicians forever, but I didn't really have an archetype to look up to, so to me it didn't seem like it was possible. And then when we started this band, it was more to prove a point that it could be possible. And then somewhere along the way we actually tried to learn how to play our instruments better and harmonize and tune, and just trying to sing and tune and in time. All for social justice.
It hits you all at once, then you'd wish that you'd been told. As circumstances change, then you're kicked out in the cold. Everyone's worth something, and it's not their weight in gold. Everyone's worth something, and it's not their weight in gold.
That was Rainbow Girls performing American Dream from their album Rolling Dumpster Fire, coincidentally talking to us by the dumpsters, of all places, at Luck Ranch. When we come back, we talk to Trey Burt and Jesse Wells.
If you're a farmer, Farm Aid is here for you. Our Farmer Resource Network offers many ways for you to connect. Our goal is to link you up with helpful services, resources, and opportunities specific to your individual needs. Our hotline operators, who speak both English and Spanish, are available at 1-800-FARM-AID, that's 1-800-327-6243, or can be reached online at farmaid.org/podcast.
My name is Burt. I'm a folk musician historically. My boss is John Prine. I'm from Sacramento, California, and I'm the nephew of blues country folk singer Thomas Burt out of Piedmont County.
If you're a fan of Farm Aid board artist Margot Price, or just a fan of good music, you might know Trey Burt. He opened for Margot on her Strays album tour, and we met up with him on that same day we talked to Steve Earle and Rainbow Girls.
We asked Trey about his approach to folk music, and if he'd be comfortable calling himself a political artist.
Well, I guess I'd say that the personal is political, and whatever that means to the individual, and I'm pretty sure everybody cares about something. Yes, by that measure, I am a political artist. I care a lot about humanity and what I see around me, and by those terms, I'm a political artist. I have a number of protest songs under my belt that range from talking about nuclear war, international war, violence against black community done by the police force, the public lynching of George Floyd, imperialism.
The judiciary branch falls off the money tree. And Mother Nature, I guess she caters to those with white skin. I don't feel well anymore. To darkness I'm returning.
He's so good, and he reminds me of Jesse Wells, another folk singer who's been getting a lot of attention. Enough that one of Farm Aid's founders invited him to play Farm Aid 2024 in Saratoga Springs. You may have seen Jesse's Power Lines videos, where he presents songs straight from the day's news. But you might not know that Jesse's been playing and recording in bands for a long time. But after his dad had a health scare, Jesse decided to dedicate himself to making music, churning out songs in response to real-time events.
You would never run out of material. That's for sure, and you can only write so many love songs and so many drinking songs and so many horse songs and dog songs and truck songs. So topical tunes. What got me into that? You're probably listening to me try to make sense of the news, and I like it better when it rhymes. And so that's what I started doing, just making the news rhyme, to promote thinking, nonviolence, and just peace above all. So. And common sense. Love your neighbor.
So, where did that sentiment come from?
That's innate in all of us.
Yeah.
We just have to get down to it. It's the only way that anyone can survive, truly be alive and live.
We asked Jesse about the folk music tradition and any artists he might see as role models.
Absolutely. I thought Woody Guthrie is the template. He might be uniquely American. I don't know if other cultures have that sort of thing. So if that is the case, it is uniquely American, but perhaps he fills the archetype for humanity as like bard or news deliverer or something like that. So something much older than anything and as far as music industry is concerned or anything like that. But your job, I took it as you take on a duty of sorts or you make it your mission to go ahead and communicate what you see around you. That is really all that you can convey with any amount of authenticity is what you see around you. If I was born in New York City, I'd be singing about tenement halls and, I don't know, subway fares or something like that. I would be singing about something else, but I was born and raised in Arkansas. And so I sing about the crippling poverty that takes up all your time and the ways that folks have been taken advantage of by larger corporations in those areas and stuff like that. There's no shortage of things to write about. I don't think there ever will be, because neither Neither one side or the other really ever fix the real problems, hunger and hate. Neither seem to be proponents of food and love at the end of the day. So, yeah.
Well, that's why we work for Willie.
Yeah, there's only games that keep us divided. Yeah, that's what I see, at least.
War is a murder, we should all give thanks. I saw it on a movie, give it up for Tom Hanks. War isn't murder, they don't ship out the poor, and the bullets they fire ain't part of the cure. War isn't murder, land is a right, but the bank's called dibs, it's something you can't fight. Let's talk about dead people. I mean dead people. The dead don't feel honor, they don't feel that brave, they don't feel avenged, they're lucky if they got graves. Call your dead mother, ask her when she...
That was Jesse Wells performing at Farm Aid 2024 in Saratoga Springs, New York. One of the things that comes up a lot when we talk to artists about engaging with social and political subjects is a kind of pushback they receive from the public. Not unlike we discussed in the intro episode to this series, when the president went after Bruce Springsteen for some of the things he said on a recent tour. Or when the Chicks spoke out about George W. Bush and the war in Iraq, and the message was similar. Keep your mouth shut, just shut up and sing. There really can be a chilling effect on an artist's right to free speech. Here's Steve Earle talking about the inconsistent reactions that different artists get.
You know, the Dixie Chicks, as they were called then, when that happened, I've known, Lloyd Main's Natalie's father is one of my oldest friends. And so I watched that really closely because I knew her a little and I was connected to it in a lot of ways. But, they asked me why they didn't react as strongly to, when I walked out on stage at Shepherd's Bush Empire, the same theater where Natalie made the statement that she did. I went on stage 6 days later with a T-shirt. I think it said "fuck Bush" on it or something like. Or it said "fuck the war," I guess. But I would have liked one that said "fuck Bush" at that point. I was pretty angry, and nobody really reacted to that, and that's because everybody by that point knew I was, what my politics were. But coming from girls, coming from women who were on country radio, there were people that saw it as a betrayal. And country radio itself, the way they reacted was sort of embarrassing to me because it's like the real issue is like you're scaring off some of our audience so we can't sell so much stuff. That's why it made a difference. That's what the difference was money.
Circling back to Dorian Lynskey, the music journalist and author of 33 Revolutions Per Minute, Hugh told us why he thinks some artists get pushback and others don't.
I think the amount of pushback you get is so context dependent. It depends what scene you're working in, what the political climate at the time is. So Pete Seeger, who was hugely successful in the Weavers, the folk group, had massive pushback from the US government due to McCarthyism. And he was called in front of HUAC to testify and refused to do so. Then you can look at somebody like John Lennon, who became identified as one of the most dangerous radicals in America when he moved to New York. And there were huge efforts there to persecute him, to deport him from the US.
Artists being attacked by the government, the media, and even the public for speaking their minds is not new. But as Steve Earle pointed out, why go after the Chicks in such a vicious way? And then just a few days later, when he expressed the same sentiment on the very same stage, there was no blowback at all.
I'm always thinking, what is it about the circumstances? What is it about the individual that draws so much heat? So you could say, for example, that when the Chicks in 2003 spoke out against President Bush in the Iraq War, was there a gendered element to the abuse they received? Like, absolutely. And you can see that in the documentary about them, the famous Entertainment Weekly cover where they were posed naked with all these kind of the insults that have been thrown at them were painted on their bodies. But also there's the fact that they were the darlings of the country scene, and that if you were outside country, you could speak out. If you were Green Day, for example, or if you were a rapper, or even if you were Springsteen, you could speak out against the Iraq War and get much less flack. But there was something about the fact they were from Texas, that the country scene was in this real sort of spasm of patriotic fervor. So all these things intersect. And I think once that heat turns on somebody, inevitably a lot of the criticisms they get will be gendered, will be racialized.
It's true, whether they're comments from the stage or something recorded on vinyl. It's just a statement, just a record. But listeners both appreciate their artists speaking up on issues that are important to them, or they really don't like it. In our next episode, we'll pick up on this theme by talking to a number of artists about how they navigate critics, how they help others through the creative process, and how they use storytelling as activism.
There is something healing in you sharing your story, standing in your power, telling people your story, because you're going to help someone else in their healing process, right?
That was artist Kashana. Come back next week to hear from her, as well as Farm-Aid board artist Margot Price and Tammy Nielsen on the next episode of Against the Grain.
Don't miss the companion playlists for each episode, which can be found on our website, farmaid.org/podcast.
Is there something you want us to cover in the future? Send us an email or drop a comment. You can email us at podcast@farmaid.org and find us on social media, which is @farmaid on Instagram, Facebook, Threads, and now on Blue Sky.
And don't forget YouTube, where you can watch almost 40 years of performances and other content. Let your friends know about Against the Grain. We're beyond grateful when you listen, share, like, and subscribe to this podcast.
Against the Grain was written and produced by us, with sound editing by Endhouse Media and direction from Don Sorokin. And thanks to Micah Nelson for our awesome theme music.
Thanks so much to all the artists who took the time to speak with us. Head over to our website to watch videos, check out those playlists, and learn more. www.farmaid.org/podcast. And thanks to all the farmers out there. We'll chat with you next time.